What's up, my friends? My name is Benny, and you are now in the Chop Shop, and I'm so glad to be back, and I'm not alone this time, and I've actually invited my brother Eli onto this week's episode of the podcast. How you doing, Eli?
I'm doing good. I'm doing good. Feeling relaxed, ready to go.
Good.
Yeah.
I'm glad because we're doing this in my house, so I hope you feel relaxed.
Yeah.
Hope you feel at home.
Yeah, I've been here once or twice.
Yeah, sure. A few times. So, so listen, as I mentioned before, took some time off the podcast to kind of get, and you kind of get this, like sometimes, you go through the seasons every year where like, okay, summertime and then back to school time and then holidays where like the rhythm changes. Like you get used to a rhythm and then it changes. So you kind of, those first couple of weeks when it changes, you kind of have to like, okay, you're trying to catch up.
Yeah.
So that's I took some time off because I'm like, I got to get this right. Kids back in school and having to, get them ready for school the next day. So, but I wanted to come back and I didn't want to come back alone. And I've asked my brother to come on because I feel like, we grew up in the same house, raised the same, but yet, as we are right outside the racetrack here. But like, I think it's interesting to see how people can grow up in the same house, but like take different things away from the way they're raised,
Yeah. Different experiences.
Yeah. So like, there's a lot of things I want to get into, and ask you about. I feel like a lot of like value that you can add, but also just like stories that you could tell too. So let me start off with a couple of just like fun questions to kind of break the ice, get people to get to know you a little bit.
Yeah, sure.
So, okay. So you are a musician. You play music.
Yep.
More than one instrument.
Yes.
What band or what artist would you say is like the artist you'd be like, I draw inspiration from this artist?
So I actually been thinking about this all this last week. And so I think there are 4 different bands that were extremely pivotal to my take on music and its career and that kind of thing. So the first one, which I think is probably pretty obvious between me and you, was the band Salvador.
Yes.
And huge. So this was, if you don't know, they were a Latin rock band. And I think for me, because we didn't grow up listening to like Santana or anything like that.
Yeah.
So for me to see like, these Mexican Americans who their first language is English, take on these takes of modernizing these, Spanish tunes and kind of making them own. It was really really inspiring to me. So that by far, that was like number one kind of first influence. The second one, and this might throw you back for a hot minute. There's a band named Forever Changed.
Yes.
Forever Changed. Yeah. And so the story with them is I found their music in 2009 and they broke up in 2007. Mm-hmm. So I never got a chance to watch them live, but I remember as soon as I found it, I went through, listened to both of their albums and was like, oh, this is like so amazing. Like I wonder when the next one's coming out. And then I realized they broke up already, but they still influence. I've listened to it on the way here. Yeah, like I've been re-listening to those 2 albums, and they really hold up. They're really, really good. In fact, I may or may not have found the lead singer on Instagram, and I may or may not have requested a friend follow.
Oh, nice!
Because he's very important. That band was very important.
Yeah.
The other 2 are hand in hand. And they're for different reasons, and that's Sleep for Sleepers, and Hazel and Vine.
Yeah.
Now, for many of you watching, you probably have no idea who those bands are, but let me explain why they were so important. They were bands that were touring across the nation that we knew were our age, and I think that was huge for me because I think. For us, it was like, oh, let's kind of play the local show. Maybe we'll do, if we hit big time, we'll do like a Joshua Tree or like a Joshua Fest.
Like a Christian festival.
A Christian festival, music festival. That would be like the big top line thing. And then I remember we were working at a radio station at the time. And someone was like, hey, I'm having lunch with Sleep for Sleepers. Would you like to come? We'd listened to the band for a couple of months, and I was like, these guys are amazing. Like, it'll be like cool to see these guys in their like mid 30s,
Yeah, these
40s.
Grown up guys.
Yeah, you thinking like Switchfoot, like adults. And I met them at lunch, and I was like, oh my gosh, these guys are my age,
Yeah.
and they're doing this. And so same with Hazel and Vine. I'm still in contact with Kyle Monroe. He's living out in Nashville. I try and see him anytime I'm out there, but was just so important. He is always confused by it. Like, I don't understand like how, but it's like for me, it was like seeing someone that was my age, like actually like doing the music thing, taking it seriously, and like really trying to be excellent was kind of a big thing for me. So kind of a long answer, but
Yeah. No, I think so. I think this kind of leads into like kind of. I wouldn't say our first memory together, but one of the more memorable things of our lives that we did together was we got to play in a band together.
Right.
And I think, those bands, Hazel and Vine, Sleep for Sleepers, like you said, not only were they our age, but they were touring already.
Yeah.
They weren't big time, obviously, but they were on tours. They were hitting tons of venues and sometimes playing with bigger bands, sometimes not. But to me, they were like the first ones that like, they were our age, they were touring. They made that band life seem realistic, like for us.
Yeah.
It was like, oh, we could do this.
Totally.
You know what I mean? Because up till then, mainly what we did was like churches, youth services, camps, like kind of when you're a Christian band, like coming in, that's kind of that's like bread and butter.
Right.
You can always fall back on doing churches, doing youth events, doing camps. Even if you're a band, it's like they invite you to come over, but they don't want you to play your songs. They want you to lead worship, and it's like, oh, okay, we'll lead worship then. So like it. But these bands that you mentioned, Sleep for Sleepers and Hazel and Vine, and there's a couple others. Like it was the first time I was like, oh shoot, like we could do this. There's a scene of like Christian bands that aren't worship, rock, alternative, whatever. There's a space for us to do this.
Right.
And so, I think I agree with you. Like those bands were definitely, and they were really great guys too.
Oh yeah, most definitely. I think that's where it was because obviously the age thing is cool, but I think it was more just like personality and relatability of like, yeah, I like totally know this guy. Like this is like a guy I went to high school with, right? So it's like I think for me, it was kind of taking the big picture. And like, while I never went and did like big, tours or anything like that, it definitely like expanded my my perception of like what I could do musically and, who I could share it with and just beyond like, just doing it for a couple friends. And so, yeah, it was kind of a big thing for me. So,
yeah.
Yeah.
So on top of being a musician growing up, you were also really into Pokemon.
Yes, still am.
Still are.
Still are, yeah.
Could you explain to me the like, because I didn't grab onto it,
Right.
but what about Pokemon like kind of like reached out to you when you were younger and it's stuck with you all these years? I'm just curious to know. Like, there's a huge
Yes,
like following market, whatever you want to call it. People, there's a lot of people out there that do into this. They play the game. They are involved in all things Pokemon.
right.
I'm just curious to know, like for you, what was the thing that kind of like, man, this is cool. I want to do this.
It's fascinating. For those of you that don't know the history of Pokemon, I'll go into a quick history of it. No,
This is turning into a Pokemon
podcast. We can start that too. But it really is really interesting because it was the game, and the game came out, and it was doing okay, and then they started the show, and then it exploded. Immediately,
Right.
they're like, we want more games, we want more this.
Now, I remember watching the show,
Yes.
and I enjoyed the show.
Right.
Thought the show was great. That's where it stopped for me. But
Yeah, I really enjoyed the show. I remember going to Blockbuster and like renting Pokemon the first movie, which if you haven't seen, I think is a great entryway into it because it's actually like it's very good. I still think it holds up, and I think the message still holds up kind of in the end of it as well.
Yeah.
But I think for me, we moved around a lot.
Yeah.
When we were younger, I remember I think we went to like maybe 3 or 4 different elementary schools.
We went to 3, possibly a 4th. Yeah.
Yeah,
maybe.
I was at Luther Burbank.
Yeah.
And then I was at Bellevue for a year, and then I was at John Reed.
Yeah.
So by the time I came in, into Roanoke Park, which is where we stayed for most of our life.
Right.
It was hard. I was already in third grade. It was hard to make a connect, and there was somebody that I was starting to kind of make a friendship with, and he gave me a bunch of Pokemon cards. And I think for me, like, that was kind of the initial step of like, cool, like this is a really bonding experience with that. And I think it just kind of evolved. I mean, for me now, it's a lot of nostalgia. I'm not like a old head. Like, I love all generations of Pokemon.
Yeah.
All the way up until they made it Switch only, and I can't afford a Switch right now. Somebody would like to donate me a Switch, I'm more than happy to receive one.
Yeah.
But it's just always, it's just always been fun for me, right? Like, it's just kind of learning the new. I think the mechanics are really friendly to, kids that want to learn. But if I remember like, being like, 17, 18, and then like diving into this now new competitive world of Pokemon,
right,
where there's all these new mechanics and stuff that were happening way beyond what I thought was happening before. And so, and that's just kind of the way my brain works. It's like, like I really like to understand something and like really kind of dive deep into that.
So at first it started off as like a kind of like this thing that you could connect with this new person, a first friend in a new place, and then your mind just went curious from there, looking into it. And
they've always done a very good job of like implementing new Pokemon and new cards and new regions and stuff. And so there's always a way to kind of keep you interested. And for a while, it was every couple of years they'd have a new game, so it'd become the new thing. Like, I remember being like with Josh, and like here we are, we're two dudes in our 20s sitting out of GameStop, the only ones sitting outside of GameStop waiting for the new Pokemon to release. Yeah. And so like we'd be out there an hour before and just be playing, and there's these two guys just sitting on the side of the side of
those guys must be there for Call of Duty. Wait, no, Call of Duty doesn't come out.
The Call of Duty thing for sure, but the Pokemon thing was always kind of a yearly tradition. So for me, it's always been a tie of friendship and stuff. So
so growing up in our house, like what were some of the things that stuck out to you? Like what are some either some memories, some stories, something interesting maybe, or just something that just stuck with you like all these years? Like, what is something that you took away from growing up in our house?
So I'm one of four, right? Mm-hmm. So Ben, my older brother, I have a younger sister and a younger brother, our youngest. And so there was always something to do. We spent most of our life in kind of like a trailer park, but not really trailer. It's kind of hard to explain.
It was a
mobile home park kind of thing, but none of the houses were mobile.
They weren't on wheels or anything.
So in that there was a lot of kind of retiree and then some like older adults. There wasn't a lot of kids that were living at the time. Yeah. So I always remember like it was nice having some built-in siblings, and like during the summer, like being able to hang out. It was great. This last Christmas we got to watch some some old movies, some old videos and stuff, and just kind of remembering being that. And I think I'm very fortunate to have that, because I know a lot of friends that they've got one sibling, or they don't have any siblings at all, so to have that experience was really interesting. But I would also consider myself like a true middle. So like we have like Ben, the oldest, and then there's me, and then there's the only daughter, and then there's the youngest son. Yeah. So like for me, like it was, it's really interesting now. You can kind of go back and reflect on it, and I try and say this, not trying to earn sympathy or traumatic, but just kind of a observation of my life. Is that I was always kind of fighting for attention, like attention from my parents, attention from you guys and stuff. Right. And, having Zeke and our older cousin and stuff, I always felt like, I was never getting the attention. So for me, humor was like a big way of doing that. So I was always trying to be very brash, very loud. I'm still of that, of that vein of my siblings. I tend to be that, but it's really interesting. It was really interesting that you pointed that we could live in the same house and experience all the same experiences, but experience them differently and through different lens. Right. Yeah. And so for me, it was very much like, just trying to kind of navigate life, like going to church every Sunday and Friday and doing the music thing. And, at the same time being one of four siblings and, just trying to figure out who you are in life and stuff. So, but for me, like, I think I was really blessed. I mean, we've got a great family. We've got a huge family. And so, For me, that's something I look back at fondly.
Yeah.
Is just having kind of that experience, having those big Thanksgiving dinners.
Right.
Like
Yeah.
all the cousins are there, and like
Right.
running into the room and playing together. I know a lot of people don't get a chance to kind of experience that, but yeah, hopefully.
Yeah. No, I think that's like, just thinking about the order that we were born in has a huge impact on how our perspective. And, it's funny because, so Abel, my oldest, Ruthie and I talk about it all the time. We think that his sense of humor just jumped me and just came from you, because it's almost identical, type of humor.
Yeah.
And this isn't, and again, this is, he's the oldest. He's had this humor way before Dahlia came. It's just who he is. He's very like just kind of, hey guys, look at me doing something funny and saying something funny, and I always turn to Ruthie. I'm like, man, that's Eli. That's Eli all day long. So it's kind of funny that you bring that up. So you grew up with a great family. We talked about kind of some of the musical influences. What was it about music that drew you in the beginning, when you first started playing trumpet, right? So you started on trumpet?
Yeah.
So
technically clarinet.
Yeah, I remember you started on clarinet. Yeah, you started on clarinet. Okay, so what happened? You just you're like, nah, I can't do this
kind of
no
a
more?
funny story. So our family very musical.
Yes.
My dad was a bass player, a guitar player. My mom was a singer, and so
Dad sang too, though.
Dad sings too. Yeah. Great singer. And so music always felt very natural. My Uncle Zeke playing sax, so music felt very, very natural to me. So the funny thing is that you played trumpet the year before I did.
Right.
And so I started on clarinet to try something new. And when I couldn't figure out the whole reed situation, I was like, well, Ben plays trumpet. I could play trumpet too. So there was very much, if you know some stories of us being younger, I was very much like, a part of that attention was vying attention from you too.
Yeah.
Right, as my older brother, like I want to be like cool, like my older brother kind of thing, and so that kind of carried on. Like, oh, Glenn plays trumpet, well, I can play trumpet too.
Yeah.
And so that was one of those things that I was like, okay, cool. And I don't necessarily know what made it stick for me. I really enjoyed it, and I really enjoyed the challenge of it. I remember always trying to kind of challenge myself.
Yeah.
Always trying to pick the most challenging pieces.
Yeah.
And it really kind of like spoke to me in a really certain way. Like, I love athletics and I love playing basketball and stuff like that, but music was always kind of like my thing. And especially as I got older, when I was trying to figure out what other things I can do, like baseball. You played baseball? I want to play baseball. Yeah. Basketball. Like, my friends play basketball. I want to play basketball. Yeah. Music was always kind of that like just solid home thing for me. Yeah. Of like, I really enjoy doing this. I'm actually pretty good at it. Yeah. And again, I think some of that is probably some of the attention thing too. People were noticing how good I was, and so I wanted to continue to be better so that more people would notice me.
Yeah, I think one thing that I feel like is a consistent thing in your life, and as we continue forward, you kind of see this tied in throughout Eli's life, is just. You like to be challenged, and so when you find a challenge, you have the ability to just put your head down and get into it. Like I think that there are things that, like, not everybody has that quality of like, oh, this is going to be really difficult. I'm going to put my head down and work as hard as I can to figure this thing out, and that's what you have. Yeah, because. You start off with trumpet, and then from there, you progressed greatly. Like, I only played trumpet for 2 years, and I think I stopped after that. But you like stuck with it, and you were good. And then, later on, you picked up the guitar, and you started to do that. And then from the guitar, it was you were playing piano, and then you were singing, and then even beyond, like now, and we'll get into this a little bit, but. Yeah. Now you're like, oh, I'm just going to start a videography business, and I'm going to do that. Like, and there's something like, I admire you for it, and I tell people this, I don't think I've ever told you, which is fine. But when we talk about you, people ask about you, I'm always like, you know what, Eli, Like that guy, whatever it is that you give him, he'll figure out how to do it. He just will, and then he's gonna be great at it. You know, like he's gonna be able to like do the videography thing, and it's gonna look professional, like he's been doing it for years, and he's only been doing it for a few, you know, or whatever. So you've always had that quality of like just putting your. Or me, I'm more of like what feels natural to me. Oh, baseball. I'm naturally pretty good at baseball, so I'm gonna work hard at this. You know, even like public speaking, like, oh, I'm naturally good at this, so I'm gonna dedicate. Like for me, I won't just like look at a challenge and be like, I'm gonna take that on. For me, I'll only take something on if it feels natural for me.
Yeah.
Where you are willing to go out of your comfort zone and be like, no, I'm gonna do this. Like, and you do it well. So I think that the trumpet thing is just like one of the first things that you just like, I'm gonna put my head down, I'm gonna work for whatever motivation that might have been.
Yeah.
But still, the discipline to put your head down and like do it is something that not everybody possesses.
Well, it's kind of funny. So they brought up the keyboard. So I did keyboard before I did guitar.
Right.
And the story of this goes is that Aida, our cousin, was our keyboard player, and she moved to San Diego. But before she did that, she taught me all the major and minor chords on piano. Mm-hmm. And so I did that. I never followed up with that. But as soon as she left, they looked at me and they're like, great, you're our new keyboard player.
Yeah.
And I remember hauntedly, vividly, our first Sunday and me playing keyboard and just remembering it being a complete train wreck. Everything was going way too fast. I couldn't remember anything. You know, like at that time, I don't even think it was in the system. I was in the speaker behind me. So even though not the whole church could hear me, I could hear how bad it was.
Yeah.
And so I remember after that first week, I was like, just nose in book, because I was like, I never want to suck that bad ever again. So, you know, it's always funny because I always tell musicians, like, well, how do I get better? The best way to get better is play with musicians that are better than you. Honestly, that's a great skill. How do I be better at something? Do it with someone that's better than you, and then you'll usually get that burning desire of like, I want to be that good.
Yeah.
You'll be inspired to come and do that. So for me, it was like, I never want to suck that bad.
Yeah.
And so that just kind of spurred on the progress. But yeah, I just remember how bad it was.
Yeah. So, you know, you play trumpet, you're playing keyboard, you eventually pick up the guitar, start doing that as well. You're singing, right? You're part of the worship there at our local church. And I'm just gonna fast forward here a little bit because I kind of want to, you know, touch on some other things. But so years down the road, right? You get married and everything, and you end up taking on the role of a worship pastor at a local church.
Right.
You actually are called into that position. Now, correct me if I'm wrong. Was that the first time you were like, that was your position? Because you were never like officially appointed at our church.
Correct.
Right?
I was never officially appointed at our church. I did a stint while I was engaged to Jana at Spring Hills at local church. I did their after dark program. Mm-hmm. But again, I was just kind of brought in on a per basis. Funny story is that the money I made from that actually paid towards Jenna's engagement ring.
Oh, cool.
So kind of a full circle moment on that one.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd never taken on a proper position as like a worship leader.
Yeah. Until you took the bridge. Yeah. So can you talk a little bit about just, you know, because obviously till then it's like I knew, those who knew you, it's like, we know Eli musically can do this. He's great. You know, he can do this. What was it like to first step into that role? What were some of the fears, the doubts maybe you had about yourself, or the things that you were really excited about? Like, just kind of take me through what that first month of stepping into something like that felt like.
So I think I was very fortunate because our mom was the appointed worship leader at our church.
Right.
And so for me, I always tell people this story. I think it's really funny. So they're like, oh, so like, when did you get a calling for worship? And I tell them, you know, when I was like 14, I remember going to a youth camp and just having a really, you know, powerful moment. And And I remember I said, I'm never going to be a worship leader.
Yeah.
Ever.
Yeah.
And so the way that God works is, of course, when you say that, then
Yeah.
it lines
That's
up.
what I'm going to have you do.
That's how it lines up. But for me, the reason I said that was because I understood that the job was more than just music.
Yeah.
Right? We got to watch our mom go through some pretty like difficult like relationships and trying to navigate, between like favoritism between people and really trying to like organize a team. So from the onset, I knew if I ever was going to take a position, it needed to be the right fit.
Right.
And I had gotten a couple offers from a couple different churches about coming and do it, but it just never really felt right.
Right.
And so at the time, I was just newly married, and about a year or so, and I was working at SoFi.
Right.
So every time I see SoFi Stadium, I always kind of chuckle. But I remember at the time I was kind of helping out, and I got a call from the ministry, and they said, "Hey, we're going to be opening up in a second location. We would love if you would be interested in coming on full time to do worship and young adults, because if you're a worship pastor, you can't just do that.
Yeah.
It's for some reason you can never just
that job is not
unless
busy
you have
enough.
a massive church. You've got to have at least more than one hat. And anyone that's in a smaller ministry will know that you wear multiple hats.
Yeah.
And for me, it really was difficult because Jenna had just started her photography business.
Right.
So and this was like close to like a 60% pay cut for me.
Yeah.
So it was huge cut. But at the same time, too, like I just felt like my job that I was working at SoFi was not fulfilling. I just felt like I was waking up, going to work, coming back, going to sleep, and doing the same thing over again. And I really felt like, you know what, I've been here since the beginning of this ministry. I know the leadership. I know the direction they want to go. I really feel like, I can complement what's already on there, and they can kind of push me in that way. And so, with a lot of fear financially.
Yeah.
And at the time, my father-in-law worked there. So how do you navigate that whole challenge of like having family in ministry, that, could possibly be my boss kind of thing. And so, but for me, it was just like, you know what? I think this is it. I think this is kind of like God calling me into that. And so I came into it as humble as I could, but eager, just like anybody new to ministry, wanting to kind of leave your place, put your foot stamp into thing. I was very blessed to have another worship leader on staff. That Glenn, if you're watching this, probably not, but was a huge help to me. So it was just kind of like, all right, jump into that. So the first campus I went was completely set up and tear down.
Right.
I had I
remember when you guys would do that.
real volunteers. Yeah. No worship bands because it was all at the other campus. So it was all very DIY. So on top of, kind of joining this position, it was basically, eat what you kill kind of thing, right? You're on the hunt for whoever you need to, right?
Yeah.
And so a lot of it was just kind of building a relationship. We were fortunate to have a small group of volunteers that committed for the first 6 months that they were going to be there and support. And then it was just calling friends.
Yeah.
It's like, hey, I'm a new worship leader. Can you come, maybe come play drums or can you come play bass, kind of thing, and just building relationships that way. So
let me ask you this question because it's just coming up to me as you're talking about all that. What was it like to then have to do that during COVID and everything?
COVID, okay, I may get some flack, but it's my truth. COVID was actually a really good time for me.
Okay.
At the time, both campuses had kind of like dwindled down, and so at the time, I was the only worship leader on staff doing 2 services at 2 different locations, traveling here, there, and everywhere. And right around the time of COVID, my son was like 5 months or 6 months after lockdown. After lockdown was probably 8 months. And so while workload wise, and I'll talk a little bit about that a little later, but like workload wise was a lot, like it really got me time to like stop.
Yeah.
Spend time with my son, spend time with my wife, walk around. The only thing you could do is walk, go meet my neighbors.
Yeah.
You know, build community, and with that too, like I got an opportunity to be creative again. You know, like I looked at all the church services, which no disrespect, because I understand COVID was a hard time.
Yeah.
But I saw all these churches that were recording all their services inside an empty building. I was just like, it just feels boring to me, you know? Like, I understand that's where all the equipment was. By the time I was like, we've got a camera. Like, why don't we just go? And so that's what we did. Like, for sermons, we would just find a place to go preach.
Because when COVID happened, you basically assumed video production as well on top of worship, right?
I mean, I think most worship leaders take on not only just the worship, but an audio-visual role as well.
Yeah.
They're in charge of making slides, usually in charge of making videos, because they're usually one of the only few creatives on staff.
Got it.
So they tend to encompass anything that they can do.
Yeah.
And so, yeah, so I was in charge of figuring out, okay, like, how do we do church? And so for me, like, that was kind of the exciting thing of like, wait, like, I don't have to be held, like, basically, like, anywhere I could take a, you know, one of those lithium, like, battery things, you know, like plug-in backup generators.
Yeah.
I could go do a sermon. I could go do worship.
Yeah.
And so that's where it started. And then for me, musically, I really wanted to do something really inspiring. And so I was like, you know, what would be really fun is I've got all these musician friends that live all over the country that I know aren't doing nothing. They're doing nothing right now. So I brought this idea of like, well, what if I just started sending tracks to my friends and they could record at home, and then it gives me a chance to like play with them. It gives them a chance to like do something while they're in COVID and keep their skills up. And so I got a chance to do that, right?
Yeah.
Like Chris Eccles was out in Sacramento at the time. He got to do one. My friend Ezra, who was down in Tucson, he got a chance to come out and do that. And the funny thing was that I was doing it for both the English service and the Spanish service.
Right. Yeah.
So I had to pick songs that I knew translated and had a Spanish version song.
Yeah.
I was very selective about what songs I chose, and then I needed to find Spanish vocalists. So it helped me to be able to do a couple songs in Spanish.
Yeah.
But I got in contact with somebody in Texas. And she was like, oh, yeah, I'd love to do that with my friend. It's like, cool. I will take any help I can get. And she was like, hey, my friend like wants to play bass. Like, are you into that? And I was like, yeah, I'm always looking for musicians. Okay, cool. Yeah, he's pretty good. He plays with Marcos Witt. And I was like, what? And he was like, yeah, he plays with Marcos Witt. And so he said he'd love to do it. And so I'm like, I'm freaking out. If you're not freaking out, Marcos Witt, if you're a Christian in the Anglo section, if you will, or the CCM, is basically the Spanish Chris Tomlin. So like huge amount of songs, like very influential. And so that was like a really cool opportunity for me to play with this guy. I had them all shoot videos, and so he's shooting it in his big like studio. And I was like, oh, this is so cool. Yeah. So all his tracks came back sounding great. But yeah, for me, it was just like such a creative wham bam time. And then for me as well, like it was just great to just have time. I didn't have to go to the office.
Right.
I could just play around with my son and do that. So
for sure. I think COVID for us was actually a really good time too. We were just getting back from San Diego, and it really gave us an opportunity to kind of catch our breath, get established, and then, get back, like kind of move in. But honestly, the COVID time for us too was great. Like that's where we found the Promise Center, new relationships for our family. It was good. Like you said, like a lot of like home time.
Yeah.
And so, I don't think there's anything wrong with you saying like it was a great time. Like,
and it was also a good time. So at the very beginning, it was actually really funny. I was actually speaking with a fellow worship leader, a friend of mine, and we were talking about COVID, and we were talking about how, as creatives, a lot of the work that we bring on ourselves.
Yeah.
It's like this idea of like we want to push and create, and then it just gets to a point where it just becomes overwhelming.
Yeah.
And we feel we have to hold to the status quo.
Yeah.
Right. And so it's just like, it's very easy for especially young worship leaders. If I can say anything to, if you're watching, if you're a young worship leader or just new in ministry, Like, really have boundaries with your time and really evaluate, you know, what, how much time is this going to take and to what benefit. Because at the very beginning of COVID, I was working like 65-hour weeks.
Yeah.
I was, doing stems, sending it out, recording sermons, editing on Saturday, and then uploading on Sunday, and then being in the chat Sunday morning, and it was exhausting. Yeah. I was literally working 6-7 days a week, and it was exhausting. And my wife introduced me to a book by John Mark Comer, The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry, and he brings up this concept of like Sabbath. Yeah. So there's one day a week where he just turns off his phone, off his email, and it's just a time to like connect with your family, go on hikes, enjoy dinner together, read the Bible, be really intentional in prayer. And he said, after, a couple of months, the kids were looking forward to Sabbath. Yeah. And so we started implementing it during COVID, and we're still doing it now. And it's really been a life-giving thing for me to like be able to say, okay, phone's off, no emails, like let's go, let's sleep in where we need to, right? Let's catch up on our sleep where we need to. Let's go out on a hike. Let's just go enjoy. Let's go pick blackberries. Last 2 Mondays ago, we were up in Fort Bragg, and they had the Paul Bunyan parade, and so we brought James up and got to do the Paul Bunyan parade. You know, and those are moments that, especially if you have like young kids, those moments just fly by. Right. So it was, it was just really great for us, and I would recommend if you haven't read the book, read the book. What's the name of the book? The Ruthless Elimination of Hurry. Okay. By John Mark Comer. Anything he writes is good.
I've heard some other books that people have recommended that they say is really good. Yeah. So you've been married now for how long?
Next year will be 10 years.
10 years.
Yeah.
Dang, dude.
Yeah, I know.
Wow. So you and your wife are married, coming up on 10 years.
That's true. We are married.
Yes, that's why she is. That's why she is your wife.
My wife. Yes.
See, we're making connections here. We're getting down to the nitty gritty.
Taxes, baby.
So, I want to talk about being a dad.
Yeah,
I feel like that's something that I think it's always cool to hear guys talk about being a dad. I feel like I learn a lot. Ruthie will know this, but like, isn't it funny how our wives will tell us something, but when a guy tells us something, especially a guy that we know has the experience, says something, we're like, that's brilliant. That's and then powerful. We tell our wife, and they're like, I've been telling you that the whole entire time. So this is for all the guys out there that have ignored their wives.
This is directly to you.
We've been there. We've been
listening to your wives, and we put this list together.
Your wives send in this list. Okay. But like, let's just talk real quick about a couple of things about being a dad. I mean, what is like the one thing that after being a dad for, you guys say 3-4 years?
He's 4. Yeah,
4. Okay, so you've been a dad for 4 years. So you got some room now. So what is like one of the bigger things that have kind of like, oh, so that's why dad would do that? Like, what were some of the biggest, like, kind of discoveries about being a dad that maybe you didn't understand about before?
Yeah.
Now you do.
Well, first things first, how crazy that we're dads.
That is pretty crazy.
That's pretty crazy, right? That's
who would trust us with the kids?
Honestly, like, that's always, that's what I always remember, like, How I Met Your Mother. There's, like, this scene. But, like, that's the first thing you think about when someone has their kid. You're, like, think back to the most, like, embarrassing story, and like, that guy's a dad. Yeah, that's true.
What's funny is that like Abel and Mateo, they wrestle.
Yeah,
they wrestle.
I've noticed.
Yeah. And then they're wrestling, and Ruthie's like, man, these kids won't stop wrestling. I'm like, I know, I don't get it where they get it from. I don't understand where they get it from. And then like when the boys start wrestling at mom's house or something, mom's like, oh, there's little Eli and Benji. Yep. And then Ruthie's looking at me like, I knew it was you. It was all your fault. It's like, well, yeah, that was us.
Yeah.
But like, so what has kind of stuck out to you? Like, I get why dad would do this, or I get why they say this about fatherhood. Like,
so I'll be real, because this is what Chop Shot's about.
Chop Shot's about being real.
About real. I feel like my relationship with my dad is like, it's pretty complicated. I feel like, and not in a bad way. I'm not saying that he was a bad dad. I think our dad did the best job that he could.
Yeah.
And really, like, as I keep living life, I'm like, wow, yeah, I'm not going to be perfect. I'm going to do as best as I can. But it was really hard to connect with him. Just the language barrier was kind of a big thing. And then just like, he was also very quiet, very introverted.
Yes.
In some ways. And so there were just kind of times where I just didn't really know where I landed with my dad. And like, I really didn't know, like, okay, like, how does he feel about me, kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because he's also not very emotional.
No.
He's not very vocal in sharing that too. And so for me, like, it was just kind of very difficult. It's actually really funny. So like, when I met my wife, I got to meet her dad, and I remember like, we got lunch together, and he started asking all these questions. Okay, so like, what do you do? What are you excited about?
Yeah.
You tell me all about this, tell me all about that. And I remember just sitting back in my chair. I'm like, what's this deal? Right? Like,
he's asking like, way too many questions.
What's his motive? Right?
Yeah.
And the funny part is, like, I was serious. I was like, where is he coming from? And, after knowing him now for quite some time, that's just who he is, right? He's like genuinely interested and invested in you as a person.
Yeah.
And so I never really got that from dad, you know? And so, but for me too, like, again, he's not a bad dad. Like, no, he was always there. You know what I mean? Like, he was always there. Not that he always have, like, a brilliant speech head. No, of course not. But he was always there. He was always physically there. Yeah. Like, he was always working hard. He was always trying to teach us, a lesson and stuff like that. One of the, like, cool things is, like, I don't know if you remember, but like, recycling cans, like, with dad. Yeah. Like, grabbing a can, taking it in. That's something I do with James now. Yeah. Because like, that's something my dad would do with me. Yeah. And like, seeing like the joy and wonder that kind of comes from him of like going and seeing that. Oh, I've got to check. I was like, oh my gosh, like that was me. I
get it. Yeah.
That was me, you know? And so, I think, one of the things that I kind of like learned from dad was like when to like really listen. Yeah. Like, he's like incredibly good listener and very wise. Yes. Like, when scripture says like to be slow to speak, that is him. Yeah. Like, he won't tell you something unless he's really thought about it. Yeah. And then he expresses it the way that he wants to express that.
Yeah. I would say that like, because I would say the same thing, like, as far as dad, like the way his mannerisms were, he was very to himself, didn't really share a whole lot of what he was thinking or what he thought. And you would think that, oh, that's just dad being quiet, but his mind is working, and he's like, he's very wise. And then honestly, like, dad, I don't think dad ever, and this is obviously our life with him, right? Like, obviously my dad has a story too, but like, our home life, like, I don't think dad ever said or did anything unless he prayed about it. Yeah. So like, if we had something pressing and we would talk to him and he'd listen, we would want an answer. Yeah. Like, hey, what should I do? And I remember times he'd look at me and say, I need to pray about it. We'll talk again tomorrow, or we'll talk again later. And it's like,
I think he's the pinnacle of like showing your faith through your life. He wasn't saying it, but every time he come home from work, straight into the bathroom to pray.
That I was just telling somebody this, I have a dad's group that I meet with some other guys, and I'm like, my dad, and the same thing, my dad would it'd be very rare for my dad to go out of his way to come up randomly and just be like, I love you, son. Yeah. Random, right? My dad wouldn't do that. But I know that even though my dad never said it, I know that my dad loved me because he'd pray for me every day in that bathroom. Right. Those are one things that I take away is I remember dad coming home from work. He'll say a quick hi, and we'd probably want to like talk to him or bombard him with something, or hey, can you take me here? Can you do, I did it. I'll be back. I got to go up and pray. And we knew that.
Yeah.
And there'll be times we have to knock on the door.
Oh yeah.
Nursey fell, like, or something. But like,
Nursey fell.
But we knew where he was. He was in that
Right.
bathroom.
Right.
And we knew that he wasn't on Instagram scrolling.
It's true.
He was on his knees praying.
Yeah.
So I agree. Like dad definitely, there were some things about dad that was like, okay, he was a lot more like quiet, more methodical maybe, but just like to himself. But I also know that everything dad said, he believed in.
Yeah.
Everything he did, he believed it was right. Even in the disciplining us, like
Right.
I'm looking back and growing up, I thought my dad was just angry, but I look back and I'm like, dad wasn't angry. Like dad did what he thought was what needed to be done, and I feel confident that whether I felt I was wronged or not, it doesn't matter. But because he always makes a joke that anytime he'd like spank me, I was a squirmer. I was the one that would always be like, I would run away. Where he said you would even take him the belt, which
that's true. I would do that.
There's something wrong with you on that.
No.
But
the way I like to describe it is like he's very emotionally intelligent.
Yeah.
Because not only that, because obviously he's got all us kids to worry about, but he was also like a pastoral care leader.
Yeah.
Which is like kind of like a small group
leader. Yeah.
And he would always just have a great way of kind of responding to someone and knowing when someone kind of needed some encouragement or kind of needed that kind of scripture. I mean, our mom is very, very passionate, very fiery. And so, like for me, it's like, man, that guy's walking on a tightrope every day, right? Sorry, Mom. But he was also very wise in that too. He was very wise in like where he picked his battles, when he would share something, when was it okay to share something, when it wasn't. And the same way he did that with his wife was kind of the same way with us. Yeah. Because I never really remember him like really like yelling or like being really upset.
No.
Like that's just not, I mean, I just haven't seen that from him.
Yeah.
But it was a tone thing.
Yeah.
You just knew, okay, this is serious. Like he really wants to kind of talk to you, really express. And, of course, it's always the kid's worst nightmare, the disappointment, right?
Right.
Because that's what sits heavier than the anger. It's the disappointment. So, but yeah, I think that's kind of like the biggest thing, like I really learned from him was really being very methodical in the way that I think, in the way that I respond. It helped me immensely when I was a worship pastor. It helps me immensely now, just in providing, advice. And, I've been very, very fortunate to have relationships with people where my opinion matters. Mm-hmm. And so I take that with a very serious responsibility. Yeah. If someone is asking me for advice, I really want to think about it and really like share what I feel would be best in that situation, but also leave it open-ended to have that dialogue. Yeah. And so I think that's probably like the most important thing I've learned from my dad. I'm really looking forward to having those kind of conversations with James. Yeah. We're not having that right now. Right now, it's just making the connections of red choices and green choices, right? Yeah. So how can we turn things around? So, yeah.
That's cool. So, what is something that you've in your fathering of James? What is something that you did or said, and then afterwards you're like, oh my gosh, that's dad?
Ooh.